Thank you everyone for joining us today at the virtual conference. We are thrilled to introduce our next speaker on the platform, Mr. Robert Błaszczak, who has been a leading figure into the sports technology domain. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at ShotQuality. He is a sports industry professional since the early 2000s, advising and consulting various sports IP right owners, holders, and tech providers. Today, Robert will be presenting on creating value and auxiliary revenue opportunities through sports APIs, offering his unique perspectives on the topic. We can't wait to hear his thoughts. And everyone, let's give him a warm welcome, warm virtual welcome. We welcome you, Robert, to the conference.
Hi, Ami. Thanks a lot. That's so nice to be here, and also well done on this idea of organizing an event that focuses on sports IP. I think it's one of those things that are underlying in the sports industry, and yet not many people talk about it. So I think this is a quite cool topic to dive in straight away. So we will listen without any further ado. Thanks for this nice few words of introduction as well. I will not dive too much into myself beyond of what you have already said. Maybe one thing I can just add is that API in different forms have been present through my own career as well. And I'm not a tech person myself. So if you're listening to this and you're not feeling like you have an engineering degree, don't worry. I also don't have it. And yet I've managed, I think, to progress quite well in this rather complex ecosystem. And maybe on this note, probably we should kind of dive into why API really matters in the world of sports. And I've highlighted a couple of factors. First and foremost, API allows us to deliver and interconnect those digital ecosystems in a real-time and scalable way. So we can deliver this information quickly, make it attractive, and allow it to do it at relatively low costs of getting to moving content from one place to another. And we also see a rather, I don't want to repeat the words you can see, everyone, but the fundamental shift that we see, it allows us to move from the moment when someone paid some money to a club, a league, or an event organizer before the event, and then just sat down and enjoy that. This whole became much more dynamic. This whole system, this whole set of processes has allowed us to go to different ways of, after you enter the venue, after you start watching a broadcast, after you start following your favorite match of sports via maybe even an app, suddenly you have much more options to interact and have your engagement monetized. And finally, this is something what I've mentioned in those opening notes, is that the use of API is pretty universal. Personally speaking, I haven't really come across a business that is not operating within that kind of framework. You need to digest certain content from one place, repackage that, fuel your own product solution idea with certain sports content API, and then offer something else for your audience. And I think this is pretty unique in terms of how it's unique, how universal it is, that it's a common denominator between all these different forms of engagement and products. Now, maybe a few words about the landscape, because I'm sure some people will be interested. So first of all, who is using the sports APIs? And I think the ones that should be mentioned first are those who commercialize the use of API at the biggest scale and with the lowest latency, which are the betting operators who need this for live statistics, live game updates, live changes of odds and probabilities in order to inform their own audience, punters, bettors, about the changing situation in the sports to adjust the markets, just like in a financial market, really. Secondly, we talk about different forms of media back in the day when there were only newspapers, probably APIs were not such a thing that would be popular. But these days, multimedia that are powered by online subscriptions where you have selected your favorite team, sport that you follow, you would like to be pinged about the goals scored, runs hit in cricket, buckets in basketball, etc. All these things can be customized and delivered to you as an end user thanks to the innovation in API, sorry. And then, of course, linked to the information we gather from different sports events, we can use it for the fantasy purposes. So that's still relatively new, the last 10, maybe 15 years development, where we're using the match information, we repackage that, and we deliver this to the end users so they can make their own forecasts on what will happen in the games that they follow, the leagues that they're passionate about. I don't know about you, Ami, but I do like wearable tracking devices. I do like to see what's happening in terms of doing different sports, both as an amateur athlete, but of course, I've seen it at the professional level. So all this wearable technology, whether you do it for your own purposes via app like Strava, or whether you use it with high-end products like Catapult, this wearable technology allows us to collect some performance data, and then that leads to, of course, analytics and understanding much better how did you do, how much did you run, at what pace, how was your heartbeat. And those things, of course, again, we'll discuss it later, but could be commercialized, monetized in different ways. And I also wanted to mention the broadcasters. Again, the value of the TV rights, super important for general sports ecosystem. Without this money from the rights, whether this is rights TV, whether as a recurring big deals, or if it's a subscription for OTT purposes, they want to, first of all, power the statistics in the games. I don't know if it's right, but trust me, watching live broadcast of sports without statistics of the match on the display is not so much fun. If you don't know what time of the match it is, if how many minutes left, what's the current score, etc., all these things can be delivered at scale via API. And of course, like we have seen, for instance, recently with what La Liga and Microsoft are doing, you can create some live heat maps in the match that are overlaying broadcasts as we enjoy watching sports. I mean, this is all quite exciting way of consuming API in a way, probably for many fans not even realizing that this is delivered via API. Nevertheless, there are some challenges already emerging to this very system. And first and foremost, it's all about money, because while those API data feeds are delivered from point A to B at relatively low costs, when it comes to volume, when it comes to the intellectual property behind that, there are different ways how we can monetize that. And I'm highlighting here 3 models. One is based on license fees, another one based on revenue share, and there is also a freemium model. All of them allow to deliver content from one place to another and then commercialize it in a different way. Because at the end of the day, whether you use computer vision cameras to collect live data, or if you use high-end TV production companies, you always need to have someone who's producing this content on one hand. So then when you transfer that to the end users, you need to find ways how to monetize it. And I think this is a big challenge on how we are changing. We're getting used to YouTube. We're getting used to Twitch. Those things, while still relatively new, became omnipresent in our lives. So what are the other ways of commercializing? Is it all has to be powered by ads, for instance? The other big challenge, of course, is the data ownership and the rights management of the API, because when some data is collected in one end on the beginning of the journey, at the end point, someone's asking me, am I even allowed to use the data? is it not breaching any existing rights and regulations on the market? And I think this is a super interesting topic. Again, from my previous experience of working for companies like the Genius Sports and Sport Radar, they are in the front seats of those conversations in terms of creating the value, packaging this up, and delivering to the end users to monetize it. But this whole circle of rights management is extremely critical for the whole API landscape to create recurring revenues. Then there's of course the question of, do we prefer the option of the walled garden scenario, or we prefer much more open source? I don't even want to talk about a conversation between an OpenAI and DeepSeek, and we can look even closer to day-to-day usage between products like Android and Apple. They have taken different paths in that journey. The challenges between standardization and proprietary IP when it comes to delivering API is that if you develop your own proprietary way with definitions and how you interpret the data, of course, it creates challenges for scaling this. And if you want to add more data feeds as a client and end user, if you want to expand it further, it becomes much more complex. So then the aspect of standardization requires people who would otherwise compete with each other to in fact collaborate and create an technical integration framework. That means that each computer can talk to each other and understand what they say. It's like a common language in an API space. Now, we talked briefly, Ami, and I now really like this topic. This is the nitty-gritty aspect of what I can hopefully contribute to this conversation is how do we unlock the new revenue streams through APIs. And I think this is also why quite a few people are tuning in to our call to understand, this presentation. What are the ideas behind it? So going, let's say, one by one and adding some examples through the real world, betting and integrity, just like we mentioned in one of the previous slides, it's one of the key topics here because it allows you to go to lots of leagues, federations, from absolute tier 1 in America to tier 3, tier 4 sports in Southeast Asia, leagues, competitions that otherwise are undervalued or overlooked. And you could find ways how to commercialize that content by distributing this to international audience and offering them additional revenue streams. This, of course, comes with a certain degree of responsibility and maintaining integrity monitoring services. And again, while I've used in the brackets an example from the high end of the market, those things are present across the whole ecosystem where you can monitor also via API as someone who's handling the relationship with customers, who is placing their predictions on what markets generate more interest than others. Again, as an interface, you can also, of course, develop different dashboards, and they create reports that subsequently inform you about the popularity of different competitions, events, maybe also the timing of when that occurs to, again, extract more value, create even more revenues for your partners. Another quite important branch in that space is the segment that I used the name, the media broadcasting fan engagement. I mean, we have put a lot into one, I must confess. I don't know if you're a big Formula One fan yourself, but very good. But it's very interesting how much technology we can witness when watching Formula One races these days. Of course, I use Formula One as a kind of tier one global sport, but there is also Formula E. There is a couple of other similar competitions that are very much so tech driven. And what we observe here is, of course, how this data from bolids, from the cars, but also from the cameras that are monitoring what's happening around the circuit through different also trackers, how this data can be packaged up and via APIs distributed into different sources. So in this case, we mentioned media broadcasting fan engagement. So you could see as you watch the race, you could see, for instance, how the little trackers of the bolids are moving around the circuit. You could virtually change it and see how the map is moving, what are the next curves for different cars, bolids on the circuit, what's the average speed. All these live updates as a fan, they're literally a few clicks away from you. At the same time, of course, the teams are using similar data and they pass it on in a different direction in order to have a much better understanding of their own performance in race. While media and broadcasters, again, they power the broadcasts to give you so much information about it. And with all this information, it's super interesting because that, again, creates this other way of locking the audience in. And of course, while this is a conversation about API, all these audiences, they can also stay much longer with the broadcast through this engagement, which subsequently means that the advertisers are also very happy because the engagement of the audience is far greater because there's much more stickiness between them and the product that is the broadcast. We've mentioned before fantasy games or gamification in general, sorry. And we have seen an advent of daily fantasy sports in the US over the last decade. It has kind of moved a little bit towards betting these days. Nevertheless, it still remains popular, and not just in the United States. The Premier League's Fantasy Premier League is probably one of the most played gamification challenge that everyone can participate, and it's free of charge. There are different ways how they monetize that. And what you can find out in those games is that this is the performance of individual players from the last few matches. These are the statistics generated by the league's partners in terms of performance of players on the pitch over the last few games. And this is the estimated value that it creates. And of course, the NFL season has just concluded, so it will take some time before we can play that NFL next-gen stats for the fantasy purposes next. Nevertheless, it's also a great example of a deep dive in using API for fantasy engagement. And then, of course, that links to different ways of commercializing the fans' audience. In a relatively new update, of course, how FIFPro, so the global government organization responsible for relationship with professional athletes in football, soccer, they have signed an agreement with Sports Data Labs in terms of monetizing the performance data of athletes. I think we'll be seeing only more and more of developments like that on the market. The reason for that is because market becomes much more mature, and amid much larger consolidation in this space, we are also observing that different stakeholders are recognizing what is the value that they are contributing in this space. And as they recognize that value, of course, that content subsequently have to be delivered as part of packages of data and distributed to different partners. It as well could be some of those mentioned in the first three bullets. And even though the power, the value and the revenue generation for that fourth bullet around how we use the performance data. Another example I like in that space is also around trackable data. But yeah, we can talk about it next time or maybe later. How our data helps to shape things beyond sports. But for instance, how my running, jogging data from Strava could be used by the local municipality to compare with other joggers in the neighborhood to establish at what time most people are jogging, to deploy services to ensure the safety and security of people involved in running or cleaning streets, etc. Again, with town halls becoming wiser in this space, I think there will be much more opportunities opening up. And I've mentioned, of course, grassroots and mass participation, a bit of a typo over there, apologies. So not just one example, but the companies like Speedio, Huddle, Vio, all of them working around broadcasting of games at also grassroots mass participation level. They all produce a lot of content, and this content can be distributed not only to parents, friends, family of the friends. It can be repackaged and distributed to also other media hubs that are interested in the best goals, funniest events, something happening, but also again to track the behavior of the athletes participating, their well-being, their risk for injuries, congestion, etc. So there's a lot of multi-use. All of those things are delivered via API data feeds. Now, so let's move quickly to the challenges and future outlook, because again, conscious of time, and I also want to keep your attention as it's still warm and excited. So first and foremost, we've already mentioned the fact around standardization. So we need to ensure that the data is universally consumable. As tempting it might be for some of the biggest rights owners in that space, standardization allows us to compare, for instance, how I run 100 meters and how an Olympic athlete is running 100 meters in the Olympics 100 meters race. Then again, there's also an element of the whole data fragmentation. So how do we start interpreting these different pieces of data and be able to put them all together? And I think this is a big challenge that a lot of us are currently facing in this space. And forums like your conference offers a good moment for people to get together and reflect through the conversations on what are the opportunities there and how we can work together across different companies. Of course, legal and compliance issues are a natural part of any market that is maturing, especially after years without regulation and supervision on the legal side, governmental. Of course, we are now seeing much more movement around legal and compliance side in terms of who actually owns certain data, how that data is stored. I mean, I don't need to mention the words like GDPR, for instance, because a lot of people probably, it sends shiver down their spines when they think about how this data processing became much more complex compared to where we were 10 years ago. And again, these changes are for good. They are there to protect the end users like yourself and me. But at the same time, of course, they bring extra level of challenge, difficulty, and that has to be addressed nevertheless. We've also mentioned different evolving business models. At the end of the day, as fun, as exciting it is to talk about technology and innovation in that space, it has to have commercial legs. It has to have justification on the commercial side to justify that if we're spending X on the development of this product in order to deliver API from this place to another, we're going to generate much higher than an X, right? So whether this is we're gonna like 10X or maybe 1.5, nevertheless, you want to make it profitable. by being able to earn more than you have initially invested. And that, of course, leads us to different models. A lot of people previously talked about, of course, subscriptions. We've talked a lot about it over the last decade or so because that was a very popular model. Previously to that, we had the model mostly based on advertisement. Now that we have seen that there's a fatigue around subscription model and there is much more consciousness about privacy in terms of sharing our data, we have new ways of managing those things in terms of business models. I haven't mentioned the word AI. Don't worry, I'm going to do it in the next bullet. But this is also related to those evolving business models and what happens with the data that we are all widely consume. Right, emerging trends. Finally, 20 minutes in, and I finally mentioned the AI. With all the work we do, with all the APIs that we collect, with all that broad of wisdom that we share on presentations like this one and through our work, of course, the large language models are fueled with a lot of information, and I'm sure that sooner or later this presentation will also reach the LLMs around the world. So these are the kind of big new challenges in terms of how do we use AI not only to control the costs, because suddenly we spread the data in so many more directions all the time, constantly, but how do we also maintain things like, for instance, legal compliance, so that proprietary ownership of someone's intellectual discoveries and the intellectual work. Then again, beautiful thing about AI is the work it does in forecasting, predicting the next developments. So if using the APIs from recent jogging around the park or basketball matches and the shots taken in such basketball matches, what can we predict about the long-term performance and possibilities for succeeding from similar positions? These all things come with real-time and scalability. So that comes down to our initial first slide, all within an interconnected digital system. Now, closing up slowly, looking at key takeaways. There are a few things I would like you to, of course, remember and kind of learn for your own conclusions and observations from this presentation, but perhaps we can focus on the following. APIs are definitely central to unlocking new value. Whether it's delivered into interfaces programmed by your own team, or is it via white label, or is it something that you just consume as an end user, they're omnipresent. It's almost impossible to escape them. It's better to learn about them. You don't need to be a technical person to understand how those things actually work. Secondly, and I allow myself to use two words here, I sometimes prefer to talk about commercialization. Sometimes people talk about monetization, slightly different, especially when it comes to B2B and B2C models. But what is quite important, especially when I talk to my sports partners, so rights holders at the beginning of this data chain, they must be very strategic and very careful with how this data is passed on in terms of ownership, control, and how this is packaged, because it's very easy to lose sight and control over something that you may still not fully understand what's the value behind that. So it's important to work with partners you trust and that also, just like you, share a long-term perspective. And we've mentioned this standardization of APIs. I think that industry-wide collaboration is vital. And the closer this collaboration happens, I think more and more opportunities can be unlocked because we can discover more things and we can apply them in context that is most relevant for our own organization. Hopefully, maybe even without competing with people with whom we share those ideas. Right. So on these few notes, I hope I have given you quite a perspective on API, sports, and how to commercialize or create this new commercialization opportunities.
Thank you, Robert. It was an amazing presentation. There were a lot of things to learn, there were a lot of things to understand, and it was insightful and informative.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. I have a quick 2, 3 questions. So, like, I'll just go ahead and ask you.
Of
Like,
course, please.
of the first question is like, how do APIs help in the dynamic pricing, the sponsorship activations, or the betting integration?
What a easy question to start with. Sorry for being cynical, but of course it's a sarcastic, sorry, but because it's actually a very deep question with a lot of ways to answer that. So let's start with this. APIs allows us to also understand of how much certain content is more popular in demand, how many APIs are called via different tokens to receive information from certain aspects of the games. Perhaps we find out information that that particular athlete is much more popular than another one, and then we can maybe track it down and say why in this particular location one athlete is more popular to another. And when it comes to pricing, it sometimes we also end up in a situation that maybe, especially on the betting side of things, but it could also be applicable to fantasy, as a matter of fact. Maybe we haven't properly evaluated the value behind certain events to happen or having certain players on our virtual teams to be involved. And this means that we that our audience is exploiting our weaknesses and is exploiting our mispricing, misadjustments about what's happening in certain sporting events. So definitely through API, there's a lot that we can learn about those developments on the market.
Okay. The next question, I don't know, but I just want to ask is like everyone these days is talking about blockchain, machine learning, AI. So, like, how does the sports integrate the APIs and drive innovations?
Oh, this is a very good question. So when it comes to, for instance, blockchain, it allows us to have information much more secure on, of course, different of those blocks that we put out there on this little virtual chain, which means that it's more difficult, almost impossible, to amend the information that is already there. So whether this is an information about ownership, for instance, in terms of the playing rights to certain players, or whether this is information about players' metrics like date of birth or some of the performance-related things that we don't want those things after it happened to be changed by someone manually to put a different perspective on how things were in the past. Blockchain and the technologies associated with it allow for that information to be stored more securely without any infringements in the future. And another good use of that technology in the sports context I've seen, it's also for the contracts. So we have information that 2 or maybe 3 or maybe more parties have agreed on, and having this thing stored on a blockchain allows, first of all, a certain degree of transparency, but also accountability and avoiding any legal foul play in terms of trying to change the information that was already previously agreed. And I think in this regard, this is a very interesting use of that technology in sports.
Okay. And like this is related to the leagues, like, how can small or mid-tier leagues or sports teams leverage the APIs without investing in them? High cost investments are involved. So how can that be done?
Well, I think this is a very good question to finish on. It's especially small, medium-sized leagues that should be looking at deploying different API-powered technologies because that allows them to, first of all, reach wider audiences at scale and do it at relatively low costs without a big financial commitment. Because even whether this is Akamai or if it's AWS or if it's Tata, any of those partners that you work around content delivery networks, CDNs, could help you to deliver your content to different corners of the world. So whether this is statistics, whether this is the live match updates, whether this is the broadcasts of some of the matches that you have, whether this is information for your fans who might be based on the other corner of the world, but they are waiting for this ping notification that they highlighted in their live updates app about the teams that they follow. All that is delivered across the digital sports ecosystem via APIs. So this is how you can deliver key content to your expanding network and fan base at scale in real time and create platforms for them to interact with you. And of course, again, putting my commercial hat on, this is also an opportunity for you to look at those relationships and say, how can we monetize that relationship better? Should we offer them an OTT subscription towards the next match? Perhaps we can give them a 50% off just to interest them. Or maybe you should send them to one of our online retailers to say, you watching this means that you're interested in that sport and that team. In that case, how about we send you the link to buy our merchandise from one of the online shops that are nearest to you? And maybe, for instance, if you were to work with an airline or one of those websites that are checking and comparing the prices of airlines, if they see that, for instance, Robert have gone to one of those browsers and was looking at the flights from Europe to Mumbai, maybe a local cricket or football team should send me a notification and say, hey, since you're interested, we'll be playing at home around those dates. Perhaps you can come to watch our games. This is the link to the tickets. So this creates an ecosystem where the information is passed from one place to another. And we haven't done much deep dive into technological aspect of it, but of course, a lot of those calls could be automated and subjected to different conditions. And this is all about delivery of that information from one point to another.
Thank you, Robert, for this amazing, informative, insightful session. Like I have like no words to thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Your expertise and your valuable perspectives on the topic were truly enhanced. And it has helped, I think, in understanding the topic in detail. And I think it has inspired a lot of the viewers, the audience also.
Pleasure is mine. And of course, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I, of course, look forward to tuning in to other sessions to see what other experts have to say.
Absolutely, absolutely. Once again, we appreciate you taking time out.
Thank you.